We've got CBC's Chris Glover tracking this story live from Washington. And Chris, a couple of things I want to chat about with you. First off, public outcry after the deadly mass shootings in Uvalde and in Buffalo. That's what's driving this legislation. I want to go to that, but I also want to look at something that we've been keeping an eye on, which is the Roe v. Wade, that decision coming down from the Supreme Court. Is there something up on that first? Is that making news right now? And I'll check while you talk to me.
Yes, that is making news right now. And what I am seeing is a large crowd of folks outside the Supreme Court right now. We can look at that live shot together because the decision has now come down from the Supreme Court judges here in the United States. And what I am seeing on the Supreme Court website is that Roe v. Wade has now been overruled by the Supreme Court. This is something that we had anticipated because of that draft release that came down from Justice Alito that was leaked back in May. And so now what we are seeing is crowds on both sides of this debate gathered out front of the Supreme Court in the United States, right in downtown Washington, D.C. And of course, this has happened on each day when decisions have come down here, never knowing exactly what day was going to be the day when this very important decision was going to come down for this country. Of course, it can't be understated how much of an issue this is in the United States. Very strong opinions on both sides of this debate. But what we are seeing right now is that the justices have decided to go forward with overturning in a majority ruling against Roe v. Wade, overturning that decision that legalized abortion nationwide 50 years ago. And as I had mentioned, there was a draft decision that came down back in May. And at that time, in that decision that was leaked to the media, Justice Alito had written that Roe was always on a collision course with the Constitution from the day that it was decided 50 years ago. And so now this decision coming down, it is going to be historic. There will be a lot of emotion on both sides. You can see some people there are crying, some people are shouting, some people very happy with this decision right now in the United States. And this is the scene as we continue to watch live here just outside of the Supreme Court, Suhana.
And you know what, Chris, I was just speaking with Colin Robertson about some of the summits the Prime Minister is attending, and the words that came up were political polarization. I'm sure we are going to see this now further enhanced in the United States. I suppose you're expecting, after that draft decision, there was a lot of pushback. As you mentioned, most Americans in favor of maintaining the rights for women in America to get an abortion, according to opinion polls. But what are you paying particular attention to as this decision is digested by various organizations and groups across the country?
I mean, one of the things to watch for is what happens with these protests downtown D.C. and across America. You can see in some of those shots, there's a 2.5 meter security fence that has been around encircling the Supreme Court building in downtown D.C. You can see it there. That was put up shortly after that May leak of that draft decision that said that the ruling of Roe had been overturned. And so now certainly it'll be important to watch. Is there any violence that comes out of these protests? What happens just because there has been so much emotion on both sides? And I would like to remind folks that this is all over a case that is from 2018, a Republican-backed Mississippi law banning abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It was struck down by lower courts as a violation of Roe v. Wade precedent that was set in 1973. And that, of course, legalized abortion in the U.S. nationwide. Since it was struck down in those lower courts, that is how it landed here at the Supreme Court. And of course, we know that there is a 6-3 conservative majority on that Supreme Court at the moment. So certainly this is an outcome that, especially after that leaked draft many people across the country were expecting. Of course, security officials were preparing for, as we see that fence erected there, blocking protesters from getting any closer. And I should mention, we are hearing a lot of screams. It's unclear exactly which side we're hearing from, because every day that decisions have been dropped, some people have gone down there from both sides of this debate. And so it'll be important to continue to watch those protests play out. It'll also be important to watch what happens at the state level, because really what's happening now is abortion has not just become illegal across the country. What has happened now is, due to the fact that it has been overturned, Roe v. Wade, that 50-year decision that has been in place in America. Now what will happen is the states will have to decide what happens in their own respective backyards. And we know certainly that many of the states will continue to allow abortion. It will continue to be legal in those places. Particularly, I would highlight California. They've enshrined the right to an abortion in their state's constitution, so it will certainly remain legal there. Other states, including Colorado and California, they've in fact, not only will it continue to be legal, but they're expanding access to abortion in those places. But of course, there are 13 American states that have what's known as a trigger ban, and that means that as soon as that Roe v. Wade precedent was overturned, abortion would become illegal in those states. And also, the Center for Reproductive Rights, Suhana, says that there are roughly 25 states that are likely or possible to ban abortion if they were allowed to do so. So while we watch the protests as they unfold, we're also going to need to have a close eye on what the states end up doing in terms of abortion in their own respective places, Suhana.
Chris, you've done a great job of giving us some of the background here, but this is 50 years that it has been, legal. There are constitutional protections in the United States for women over those past 5 decades. And then that battle behind the scenes of those who were on the other side, they've been fortified, as you mentioned, by those 3 appointees of former U.S. President Donald Trump. So we are waiting, Chris, and I don't know if you've heard anything yet, for any kind of comment from the current White House administration. I haven't seen anything that has been posted by Joe Biden, the president, or by any others in the United States. We're certainly watching for reaction from some of those other women's rights organizations as well. And you can expect that this coming weekend, with this decision coming out on a Friday, Chris, it could be very busy on the streets of cities across the country there in the United States. Now, I mean, it could lead, as you mentioned, to abortion bans in roughly half of the states. It will prepare others to shut down those facilities for women, according to this decision by the Supreme Court as well. But it does put the court at odds with the majority of Americans, Chris, who favored preserving Roe. Is that where the battle is going to be fought, in that discrepancy between the Supreme Court of the United States and the people, if you will, that it is supposed to speak for?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It'll be interesting to watch that front as well, because as you mentioned, polling has shown that around 60% of Americans did not want to overturn Roe. So to see this now happening will definitely be something that is against the will of at least the majority of Americans, according to recent polling. It also could continue to erode folks' trust in the Supreme Court. There's a new Gallup poll out, Suhana, just recently, that suggests only 25% of Americans have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the justices of the Supreme Court. And that is down quite a bit, 11 percentage points just from this time last year. So it'll be interesting to watch and to see what the reaction ends up continuing to be from the American public as this decision now is down, and people will start to digest it and to see what their own states will do. I'm looking around for some of that reaction as we speak, Suhana, and I'm on the White House distribution list. So far, I've not seen a statement from the White House official distribution email system. And I'm also not seeing Joe Biden tweeting about this decision just yet. But of course, we will continue to watch. This is something that Joe Biden and the Democrats have said would be a disaster for the country, would be a problem for the country, and would lead to a hodgepodge of different rules and rights around abortion, of course, continuing to be legal in some places, becoming illegal in other places, might have folks trying to leave one state to go get an abortion in another state. And some people have already been saying, Suhana, in the days leading up to when this decision would drop, would Joe Biden take executive action here?
Yes.
To be frank, there's very little the president can do in terms of tackling this issue of abortion. He could perhaps take executive action when it comes to things like declaring a national public health emergency. He could also perhaps prep the Justice Department to fight any attempts by states to criminalize travel for the purpose of getting an abortion. Those are things that we know that some states have said that they would want to do. He could also perhaps assert the Federal Drug and Food and Drug Administration approval of abortion medications that would preempt any state bans on that. These are things that the president would have within his executive powers and his executive authority, but they all would carry with them very serious legal risks and potential court challenges as well. So it's really unclear what could happen from the White House going forward, and we'll have to pay close attention to what the White House chooses to do here as we continue to watch these protesters gather outside of the Supreme Court. And as you rightly point out, they will certainly be gathering in cities right across the country.
Yes, so as you keep an eye out for any kind of reaction from the White House, particularly, as you mentioned, Biden perhaps weighing the options of using his executive powers, there are also going to be, this is a story that covers so many grounds, not only the rights of women, not only health and physical safety, but the economy as well. I mean, there have been stories that I've been reading about the future of the abortion pill industry, if you will. Now, will women have to resort to a variety of other means in order to maintain that right to decide over the future of their own bodies? And it's not just a story about abortion. It is a story that affects so many different parts of life, whether it's the religious aspect, whether it's the economy, whether it's human rights, whether it's politics. This could become a criminal story that will be covered in the United States as well, depending on which state it is that you live. So many different aspects of this. The president, how quickly must he act, if he is going to act, in order to curtail some of the further polarization that will happen and some of the protests across the country that we are expecting to see over the weekend, Chris?
Oh, goodness. He would have to act very quickly, of course. This will be number one issue on his agenda. We've been talking about how inflation is the number one thing on the president's desk. That just wiped the inflation right off of the table, frankly, because there will be so many Americans that want him to act to try to protect abortion rights, especially in places where it is certainly anticipated that it would become illegal. And so they will be looking to the president to take some sort of action and to take it swiftly. But as I had mentioned, this is really not necessarily a surprise to a lot of people, especially with the makeup of the court right now, that 6-3 conservative majority. And it's interesting to point out as well, when Mississippi had first put this to the Supreme Court, they were asking for less than what ended up happening. Because at first they were just talking about banning abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. That was what the initial ask was. But you'll remember back when they first put this case to the Supreme Court, the makeup of the court looked different. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the left-leaning social justice advocate judge, was on the court at that time. And then over the months when the court would have been considering this case and hearing from different people on different sides of this debate, that is when Justice Amy Coney Barrett was ultimately replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Trump pick there, and that happened in summer 2021. So that certainly would have switched the dynamics of the court as well, and would lead a lot of people to anticipate that this is the outcome that might have happened when you have a 6-3 conservative majority on that court. Suhana.
Chris, I also want to turn your attention to another important decision by the Supreme Court. I mean, came almost 7 years ago to the day, but on June 26th in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples have a constitutional right to marry. Now, that was a historic ruling signifying, a turning point for the LGBTQ plus rights community in the United States. Now, you fast forward to today, people might have not thought a few months ago that an abortion ruling, a constitutional right to an abortion in the United States would ever be overturned. But now, are there going to be questions raised about if this can happen, then this can happen and that can happen. Something leads to something else. Could that something else be discussions over perhaps same-sex relationships, same-sex marriage?
That certainly would be the fear, and that is even, that was part of the conversation, Suhana, when we saw that draft release of what the justices had decided back on May 2nd when Politico first published that draft majority opinion that overturned Roe v. Wade. We saw groups that were, queer organizations across the United States concerned that this would trickle down to other rights that have been, come to be enjoyed in the United States by various groups. That was definitely the concern that we saw back in May when that draft came out. So it's almost like we got a bit of a preview, Suhana, didn't we, of what this would end up looking like now that this has happened. Certainly, we did see quite a lot of protests, quite a lot of organizations from across the country stepping up and coming forward with protests, right, in different places. And we also saw some of those protests go directly to some of those conservative justices' homes. Obviously, people were so angry with, even the notion that this was a draft report that could come down. It was something that they were taking right to those conservative justices' homes. For example, a California man named Nicholas Rosk was carrying a handgun, according to authorities. Allegedly, he also had ammunition, a crowbar, and pepper spray, and he was charged with attempted murder after being arrested just in June near Justice Brett Kavanaugh, one of the conservative judges, near his Maryland residence. So it'll be interesting to continue to watch what ends up happening in terms of what happens with these protests, because as I was also mentioning, there were even protests that were going. This whole case is coming out of Mississippi, right?
Yes.
Well, there were even pro-abortion protesters who had gone there to Mississippi and to Jackson, Mississippi, just this past Friday, and they were gathering there saying that if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned, they would continue to protest and continue to take their protests right across America, not just to Mississippi, where this is all originating from, but all across the country.
Chris, I'm just going to take a moment, and for viewers who are just joining us here at 10:30 Eastern, the bottom of the clock, you are watching live coverage coming from in front of the Supreme Court in the United States, in Washington, where the Supreme Court has basically eliminated the constitutional right to an abortion in the United States, overturning the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision, which really left the question of an abortion's legality up to the states. So that decision by the court upheld a law from Mississippi. That's what Chris has been talking about, some of the background here, that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, which is roughly 2 months earlier than what had been allowed. under the Supreme Court precedent dating back to Roe v. Wade. So the Supreme Court basically sided with Mississippi and said the Roe decision was egregiously wrong. What we're looking at and hearing now in front of the Supreme Court there in Washington are protesters gathering to fight for what they believe are the rights of women to decide over, the fate of their own bodies. And this is probably going to play out across the country. This decision from the Supreme Court is breaking news. It has just been made. So you can imagine what's happening in homes around the United States and workplaces. People are beginning to talk about this Roe v. Wade decision. Sure, there was a draft leak about a month ago or so from the Supreme Court that, led people to expect this very thing. But, it's like there's something terrible happening in your family. You can expect it, but when it comes, it hits you differently. Now it's come. And so across the country, there will be discussions happening as to how are we going to tackle this? How are we going to deal with it, not only in families, in workplaces, but also in the White House? Chris Glover, our correspondent there in Washington, has been looking for any kind of reaction from Joe Biden, the U.S. president, anything coming from this administration about how they are going to respond to this Supreme Court breaking news, overruling Roe v. Wade and a woman's constitutional right to an abortion in the United States. So that's really what we're watching, is the beginning of this movement to digest this information and decide, well, how proactive do we want to be? How proactive can we be? These questions are going to lead to a lot of political discussions as well. And we've been talking about the political polarization in the United States. We've been covering those the January 6th testimony there in Washington, and we've certainly heard about the polarization in the United States. Is it going to grow even more with this Supreme Court decision? There are other discussions as well happening behind closed doors, and that is, what are the ramifications for same-sex relationships? What are the ramifications for same-sex marriage? We do know that almost 7 years, was it 7? It was... Anyway, almost to the day, yes, I believe it was 7 years ago, the Supreme Court allowed same-sex marriages. Is that now going to be in question? Could that be something that Americans will also be discussing at the dinner table? How do they deal with it going forward? Something that maybe people had never expected would happen, as in Roe v. Wade being overturned. Could that now be the next step and the fear of even greater polarization politically in the United States? I've got CBC's Chris Glover. He is standing by in Washington. And Chris, we are watching this unfold together. There's no script. It's just happening before our eyes. You can see women who have their mouths taped up, suggesting, their voices have been taken away from them. Their right to control what happens with their body has been taken away, hence the tape over the lips. Is there anything yet from the White House? And can you walk me through what the options may be for the U.S. president?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I get into that, in addition to seeing them with their mouths taped up, you're also seeing the middle finger flashed, and you might be hearing things through our feed here. But as you mentioned, it's all live. So if you have little ones in the room, just be mindful of the fact that we don't exactly know what is going to come next and what will play out here as we watch live together this scene just outside of the Supreme Court. But I think, so far I'm looking on Biden's Twitter, haven't seen anything there just yet. I'm also looking to see if the president's email distribution list is going to come out with a statement. I would anticipate that would come very, very quickly, though so far we've not seen anything official come through, not through my inbox anyways. And so the reason why this is so significant is that now abortion is not protected as a constitutional right across the country. So therefore, it will go to the states, and individual states will have to figure out what happens in their own backyards. And we know that some, like California, California and Colorado, they will continue. They've already said that it's enshrined into their constitution. They've already voted legislation to pass that. But it's in other places where we'll have to pay close attention to see what happens there. And on that front, I'm just looking on Twitter. Senator Megan Hunt has just released a statement. She is a Nebraska senator, and she is saying that abortion is still legal in that state. Abortion funds, clinics, and support networks are there to help people. She is imploring people not to cancel abortion appointments, and if they need help, to reach out to their provider immediately. She also says that she's organizing direct action if the Nebraska legislature goes into a special session to ban abortion in that state. She says that they have stopped abortion bans in the past, and she says we will do it again. So these are the kind of defiant statements that will come out from folks who are abortion advocates, who are on the pro-choice side of this argument. Of course, this is a decision that they had anticipated could be coming down here, especially with that draft release just in May. But it will take a lot of mobilization politically and socially, and you'll see that playing out in protests right across the country. And I also found it interesting, Suhana, you mentioned how this is playing out in not just America, but around the world. And on that front, we're also hearing from politicians in Canada as well. Former Environment Minister and Liberal Catherine McKenna just tweeted a couple minutes ago, "Never ever be complacent about abortion rights," she wrote on Twitter, and that applies in Canada as well. So certainly you will see pro-choice advocates right around the world bringing up this storyline of what is playing out in the United States and relating it to their own to their own constituents, to their own communities, and to talk about what happens back in Canada and right around the world as well. So those will all be things that we're going to need to pay attention to while I await and see if and when the president is going to release a statement, which we will assume should happen any minute now.
So this ruling then, Chris, and you mentioned these two words before, trigger laws. This ruling by the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade would really send the issue of legalized abortion back to each of those individual states. Mm-hmm. Now, 13 states have those trigger laws. Is that correct?
Yep.
And they could, in essence, ban abortions. So there are, we talked about this having many tentacles, this story affecting, not only human rights issues, rights of women, health, the economy, politics. There has been discussion when the draft leak came out from the Supreme Court saying it was going to overturn Roe v. Wade, that it could stop workers from moving to those states, or workers could be leaving those states. Employers are going to have some perhaps difficult times ahead. It has so many different methods of impacting everyday Americans, where they work, which state they choose to live in, how they choose to be proactive, who their friends are, which church, which religious house they go to and belong to. Are they comfortable discussing these things? There are just so many stories out of this. As we wait for the president to make some kind of reaction to this, he's already got the news. This is breaking news, but the White House certainly has it. What is happening behind those closed doors in the West Wing right now as the discussions, begin on how to respond to the U.S. Supreme Court decision, Chris?
Well, they've no doubt been speaking about this since May, trying to figure out what, if anything, the executive branch of the U.S. government can do in this context, because we did get that draft report, or that draft ruling here from the majority of the Supreme Court justices. So the White House certainly had a lot of lead time today to get ready, just in case this was the decision from the majority of justices. So now they will likely be having a lot of frantic conversations to figure out what to do next, what they can do next, and how to move forward. There are, to be perfectly frank, very little that the president can do in this context. He could perhaps issue some executive orders in and around the abortion fight. Those have already been spoken about in the media, though it is clear that they carry serious legal risks for the president and for his administration. Easily they could be overturned, they could be challenged, and so the White House is going to have to tread very carefully. That could be why it's taken so long here to get a statement from them and to get a reaction from them, but certainly not the case from various politicians in the state level. I'm seeing another reaction here from Nina Turner. She is an Ohio state senator, and she was really quick to point out on Twitter that you can't ban abortions, you can only ban safe abortions. And I think that's a really interesting and important point to raise here because, of course, there's been a lot of study and a lot of research that has been done into what happens when abortion becomes illegal in a particular jurisdiction, and back alley abortions continue. Various people still continue to try to get that procedure, and as a result, it just becomes unsafe to do so. So we'll definitely hear that narrative and that storyline continue to play out while we watch for the states to see what they do next. But as you point out, yeah, that trigger ban is in place in 13 states. So immediately after Roe is overturned, they're able to kick in those bans in their respective states. And I was just looking on the Center for Reproductive Rights right now. They are a very common a body or organization that speaks out about abortion issues, very pro-choice, and they were saying that they were concerned over the fact that 25 states in America are what they put likely to ban abortion if it is allowed. So it'll be very interesting to watch and to see how various organizations continue to, to speak up and to talk about what resources and what supports are there for various different bodies who might be looking to try to still get an abortion. As I was mentioning, states have the ability now to make sure that abortions remain legal. They have the ability to make them illegal. And in the lead up to this, we even saw some states taking the step to expand abortion access. That happened in Colorado and some other places as well, where they were, anticipating this decision that was coming down, and they were taking those proactive measures to make sure that if this did happen, they would be able to help their citizens and also possibly accept abortion patients or patients seeking abortions from various other states as well, where now it will be able to become illegal, Suhana.
And Chris, I'm going to ask you to stand by. I know you're trying to do a million things there in Washington. Not only look for reaction from the White House, but keep an eye on which states are actually pulling the trigger. And it's probably a terrible way of referring to it as a trigger law, but that's exactly what it is on this, based on the decision of the Supreme Court. For those viewers just joining us, this is breaking news. The